Why did 300 Viking warriors die in a church without fighting? The answer has been hidden for over 1,000 years, buried beneath a quiet vicarage garden in Derbyshire. You've probably heard the legends of the Great Heathen Army, the invincible horde, the berserkers who laughed at death and conquered kingdoms. But that's the movie version, that's the lie. Because when archaeologists finally cracked open the massive burial mound at Repton, they didn't find a glorious battlefield memorial. They found a crime scene. They found a chaotic, tangled mass of skeletons that completely rewrites the history of the Viking invasion. And the most shocking part? The thing that killed these legendary warriors wasn't a Saxon sword. It was something much, much worse. To understand the horror of what happened at Repton, you have to understand where we are. It's the winter of 873. The Great Heathen Army has been tearing through England for nearly a decade. They've crushed Northumbria. They've executed King Edmund. Now they've set their sights on Mercia. They pick a spot called Repton to make their winter camp. Now, this wasn't just any spot. This was the spiritual heart of the Mercian kingdom. It was where the Mercian kings were buried. It was holy ground. So, what do the Vikings do? They don't just occupy it, they desecrate it. They take the church, the most sacred building in the region, and they turn it into a fortress. They dig a massive D-shaped ditch right next to the River Trent, using the church itself as part of the defensive wall. It's a brilliant military move, but it's also a massive psychological middle finger to the Christians. But winter in the 9th century isn't like camping. It's brutal. You have thousands of warriors, their horses, their camp followers, and their slaves, all crammed into a tiny, muddy fortification. And that is where the nightmare begins. Fast forward to the 1970s and 80s. Archaeologists are digging around St. Wiston's Church in Repton. They find the ditch. They find the fortifications. But then they find something that stops them cold. Under a small mound in the vicar's garden, they discover a sunken building. It was originally a Saxon mausoleum, a crypt for royalty. But the Vikings had broken into it. They had smashed it open, leveled it off, and filled it. And I mean, they filled it. Inside this small space were the remains of at least 264 people. It was a charnel house, a mass grave of tangled limbs and crushed skulls. The bones were stacked like firewood. Now, for years, the assumption was simple. This is the Great Heathen Army, right? These must be the guys who died in some epic last stand. Maybe a Saxon counterattack caught them off guard. Maybe this was the result of a bloody shield wall clash. But then modern science got involved. Forensic anthropologists started looking closer at the bones, and they noticed something strange. If these guys died in battle, you'd expect to see a lot of trauma. Axe wounds to the skull, sword cuts on the arms, arrowheads stuck in ribs. The usual Viking exit interview. But when they analysed the skeletons in the mass grave, the trauma wasn't there. Sure, a few had old wounds that had healed, but the vast majority of these invincible warriors didn't have a scratch on them. No crushed skulls, no severed limbs. So, what killed nearly 300 hardened Vikings in the middle of winter? The answer is grim. It was disease. The forensic analysis showed signs of infectious disease running rampant through the camp. We're talking about dysentery, tuberculosis, maybe even a form of plague. Imagine the scene. You're huddled in this freezing, muddy fortress. The sanitation is non-existent. You're drinking water from the same river you're using as a toilet. The food is running low. And suddenly the guy next to you starts coughing blood. The next day, he's dead. Then 2 more. Then 10. This wasn't a glorious death in battle. This was a slow, rotting misery. The Great Heathen Army was suffering a catastrophic epidemic. They weren't dying on their feet, they were dying in their own filth. This mass grave wasn't a monument to a battle, it was a desperate attempt to clear the bodies before the infection killed everyone. But here is where it gets really weird, because this wasn't just a garbage pit for bodies, there was a ritual happening here, a dark, deliberate ritual. The Vikings didn't just throw the bodies in, they arranged them. They took the bones of the Saxon kings who were originally buried there and just tossed them aside, literally threw the royal ancestors into the corner like trash. Then they placed one specific man in the center of the grave. This creates a massive mystery. Who was this guy? He was older, maybe 40 or 50. He was buried with a sword, a little silver Thor's hammer, and, get this, the tusk of a wild boar placed between his legs. This was a pagan symbol of immense power and fertility, but it gets darker. Around this central figure, the other bodies were stacked, radiating outward, like the spokes of a wheel. It looks like they were placed there to guard him in the afterlife. Some historians think this central figure might be someone huge, someone legendary. There's a theory, and it's controversial but it fits the timeline, that this might be the resting place of Ivar the Boneless. We know Ivar disappears from the historical record right around this time, in 873. We know he was the leader of the Great Heathen Army, and we know he was terrifying. The sagas say that Ivar asked to be buried in a place where he could guard the land against invasion. And here we have a high-ranking chieftain buried in the heart of the enemy kingdom, surrounded by a spectral army of the dead, facing south to watch for Saxon attackers. It's almost like they were building a supernatural battery. Even in death, this army was occupied. They were still on duty. But wait, I haven't told you about the double grave yet. This is the part that really chills me. Right next to the mass grave, they found a separate burial. 2 men. One was older, one was younger. The older man had been killed brutally. He had a massive cut to his skull, probably from an axe, and a sword cut to his thigh. This guy died fighting. But the younger man? He had no wounds, none. But he was buried with a Viking pendant, a little silver hammer. And buried with them was a horse's jawbone. The theory? The younger man might have been sacrificed, killed ritually to accompany the older warrior, maybe his father, maybe his lord, to Valhalla. It shows us that even while they were dying of disease, even while the army was rotting from the inside, they held on to these brutal, bloody traditions. It changes how you see them, doesn't it? We look at the maps of the Viking invasion and we see arrows moving across a board. We think of it as a game of Risk. The army moved to Repton. But the reality of that winter at Repton was a horror movie. Think about the local Mercian peasants. They look across the river and see smoke rising from their holy church. They hear the sounds of foreign rituals. They see the Vikings digging up the graves of their kings. And inside the camp, the Vikings are terrified too. Not of the Saxons, but of the invisible killer stalking through their tents. They are burying their friends by the dozen, stacking them in a desecrated crypt, hoping that the gods will stop the sickness. It strips away the romance of the Viking Age. It wasn't just longships and loot, it was mud, sickness, and the desperate struggle to survive in a land that wanted you dead. The Repton grave is the smoking gun that proves the Great Heathen Army wasn't a monolithic machine. It was a migrating community. We found loom weights for weaving. We found gold and silver pieces that had been chopped up, hack silver, used as currency. We found evidence of women and children traveling with them. This wasn't just a raiding party, it was a moving nation. And at Repton, that nation almost died. So, the next time you see a Viking show where everyone is clean, muscular, and dying glorious deaths in slow motion, remember Repton. Remember the 300 men huddled in a stolen crypt. Remember the disease. Remember the boar's tusk and the desecrated kings. History isn't pretty. It's messy, it's gross, and sometimes the truth is buried under a vicar's rose bushes for 1,000 years. Knowing what we know now about the disease and the desperation, if you were one of those warriors, would you have stayed to guard the dead, or would you have run?